Sam, press the button. I'm going to sit down because I can't stand up for long periods of time at the moment, and Dave's going to hop on and off his little stool. So just setting the scene here. Dave and I have obviously recently returned from New Zealand, otherwise called Aotearoa, which is more commonly the name that is used in New Zealand for the country. And just setting the scene, this is my bike, laden with the amount of luggage that I carried when we were cycle touring. And this is the tent that we slept in a lot of the time, our little tent, which was actually surprisingly comfortable. Here I have a magic pointer. So up here, this is the South Island of New Zealand. And over here, this is the South Island again, and this is the North Island. At the back, there are trays of shells and pebbles and stuff if you want to have a look at things like that, that I collected, that I can't stop myself collecting. And any questions that you've got for us afterwards, please ask. So, Janet and Dave's most excellent adventure. If you remember, if you were to our previous talk before we went away, we had all sorts of troubles booking a quarantine hotel, getting the flights to coordinate, all that sort of stuff. Actually getting a quarantine hotel place in the beginning when we were 25,000th in the queue initially. But, God provided, and we got a flight to Auckland, we got a quarantine hotel, we thought in Auckland, and off we went. When we arrived in New Zealand, they instantly flew us to Christchurch to quarantine. So we didn't all quarantine in Auckland. After all, we quarantined in Christchurch. And that extra little flight was just, was just what they did. They would have flown us back to Auckland at the end of quarantine if we'd needed to be up there, but we just stayed down in Christchurch. So it was fine. So, quarantine. Personally, I loved it. I want to book in for a 10-day quarantine every year from now on. It was like being on a quiet retreat for me. Dave was still doing some work on his computer, so we weren't really talking during the day very much. We had a lovely room.
That's why it's quiet.
We had a beautiful room. We had a little patio. They let us go out into the exercise yard for an exercise period every day, which was the hotel car park. The food was delicious, and it arrived, you booked it on an app the night before, and at vaguely breakfast time or lunchtime or dinner time, there was a knock on the door, and you'd open the door, and there was the bag with the food in it. And it was just really exciting. I read books, I did a jigsaw puzzle that my sister-in-law delivered to the hotel. I watched a little bit of telly, but not very much. I sat in the sunshine.
Bollywood.
Oh, I did a bit of Bollywood dance every day for exercise. It was fab, and I was really a bit reluctant to leave the hotel in the end. And we had some really rather marvellous food. It was just really good quality. It was delicious, really nice grub. So, but then, sadly, they let us go. And I did this drawing for the hotel staff to say thank you. And we loaded up all our bikes in our room, and the army escort you out and say, off you go, free you into the world.
Yeah. Quarantine's sort of partly run by the New Zealand Army, or Defence Force as they call themselves. Gives them something to do as well as the hotel staff.
Gives them something to do. Is that because New Zealand is so peaceful they don't really need an army?
Yeah.
So they gave them something to do.
More or
So
less.
when we set off from the hotel on our bikes, laden up like this, the whole weight was about 55 kilograms maybe. That was the first time I'd ever cycled my bike fully laden. Oh my goodness, I was just so unsteady, and it just felt so heavy. We had a whole 3 kilometres, 2 miles to go to our first destination. And I just thought, how am I ever going to get up a hill? Christchurch is completely flat. How am I ever going to get up a hill on this bike? It just seemed impossible. So we cycle our 2 miles, and this is the house where we stayed whenever we were in Christchurch. We stayed with this lovely lady called Fiona, and that's her house. Most houses in New Zealand are still single story. So they all look like, old people's bungalows. You can say.
So, yeah, after quarantine, had 10 days in Christchurch, so caught up with my family. And I'm just reminding myself. So, yeah, up the top, that's my brother. That's my whole family. So my brother and his wife, my sister, her husband, and my parents. There's Dad and myself.
And there's Dad and Dave's knees. Look at them. Genetically similar knees, very bony. Beautiful, lovely picture. Parents go for a picnic. So we had lots of lovely time with family in that 10 days before we left. A bit more about Christchurch. So while we were there, the COVID regulations were very strict. New Zealand the government had done a very good job at getting their team of 5 million on board, but had made everybody absolutely terrified. So people were very, very fearful of COVID. And of course, by this time, we're pretty relaxed because we're into Omicron here. We've been through most of it, so we're like chilling out and saying, oh, it's not that bad. Well, they're terrified. And so we had a vaccine passport, which we had to carry at all times, and you couldn't access anywhere without showing your vaccine passport. And every building you went into, you scanned the QR code thing when you entered. The picture on this picture here is a memorial for the 185 people that died in the last Christchurch earthquakes in 2010, 2011. And that memorial, which is one chair for each the people that died, it's actually moved a few times over the years. It tends to always be on the site of a church that was damaged and demolished after the earthquake. And then later on they may start building on that site, so the chairs are then moved. But yeah, they tend to be on those sites. And the cathedral, which was significantly damaged after the earthquake, where it's an enormous tower that was actually twice the height of the church building, that fell down. They are now restoring it. So that's this picture here. And this is one of our favourite cafes. And that's David, another of our favourite cafes. So we ate a lot of food in New Zealand. You can do that one.
So also during our time in Christchurch, we did some training rides. And one of them was to Akaroa, where my cousin has a holiday house. Top picture there's the view from her holiday house. It was just gorgeous. So the training ride to get there, though, was rather tough. If you see the graph up there, that shows height. Flat, 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 and then very steep hill. It's 1,500 feet high, so that's significant. And there was a theme to our trip of ice creams whenever we needed them.
We did seem to eat a lot of ice cream, and the biggest excuse is because we're cycling a lot, you can eat whatever you like. So then after our 10 days, off we go. Unfortunately, it's a bit of a damp day, so we set off looking like we're in the winter. And we're going away for 6 weeks. So we're going to be travelling around the South Island for 6 weeks. So our first 2 days, we travel from Christchurch, which is, shall I do it on that one? Christchurch is here, and we're coming down to Timaru, which is probably about here. So we spend literally 2 days cycling that way. And so we're on our way to Timaru, which is where Dave's sister lives. And what we experienced first of all is camping in our first nights in our tent. And New Zealand holiday parks, which is where we camped quite a lot, have excellent facilities. They're like a mixture of camping and touring motorhome type things, and maybe some little cabins that you could hire as well. But they always have fantastic kitchen facilities and a dining room and a lounge with a TV, and they'll have a laundry and they'll have great showers. And it just made the whole experience really comfortable, actually. You don't have to spend all your time squatting by your tent or in your tent in the evenings. You could just spend the evening in the lounge or whatever. And because we were the only tourists, I think, in the whole of New Zealand. So these places were always empty. And people were always like, oh, where are you from? And we say, we're from the UK. How did you get in? And they were always pleased to see us. But we never had any trouble. We never had to book anything in advance because there was always loads and loads of space. And generally, if there was anybody else in the kitchen, we were offended because it's our kitchen. Next thing we discover on our cycling in New Zealand, and I think people commented on how little traffic there ever is in my pictures, and seriously, it's like that, there's no traffic. Quite often, a lot of the time, you've just got really, really long straight roads off into infinity, which gets a little bit boring on a bicycle sometimes, I have to say, but it's just straight roads. And every now and again, you might have a car past you, like about every 10 minutes. However, we did manage to get pulled over by the police twice for cycling two abreast and having a chat. Even though, you know, a car coming past us, that the police at the time would have gone like, there's no other traffic in existence. No, we can't have a chat.
Yeah, the second policeman, he was actually driving in the other lane, the oncoming traffic lane, with his window wound down, telling me that it's better that we go single file. So there's so little traffic, he was able to go in the wrong lane.
But apparently one lady actually had pulled the police over and complained about us because we were cycling recklessly or something.
I wish the police in this country would do that.
Yeah. They haven't got a lot to do in New Zealand, obviously. And then, as you're cycling along, as you do, you come past a cornfield which is growing lilies in it, just randomly.
So like you see poppies in the fields here.
It was like,
There's just this one place we saw it, but the fields had
it was quite
lilies
amazing.
growing them.
So we get to Timaru and we spend time with Dave's sister overnight, and then off we go again. And this time we're going from Timaru, which was somewhere down here, or even somewhere down here, and we're going into inland. So we're going to a place called Tekapo, or Lake Tekapo, which Janice said that she'd heard of. And we go through a place called Fairley. And again, long straight roads. And in the distance, you can see there are mountains appearing in the distance.
It was also on this day that I had my first mechanical fault. Actually, second mechanical fault. First one was my side stand for the bike broke. But I managed to get a bit of piping and wedge it on and tape it in place, and it survived for the rest of the trip. So that's when I was at my sister's. And then, having left hers, had this funny noise in the chain. And we pulled over and had a look, and I had a broken link in my chain. So I thought, oh dear. Luckily, I'd brought some spare links, so out with the tools and everything else. And
But we are a pretty long way from anywhere at this point. So,
yes,
you
if
know,
we had to walk to get some help or whatever, yes, it
Would have been a long way.
Hours and hours of walking.
yeah, so I was looking at the whole of the landmass of New Zealand, North and South Island is just slightly greater than the whole of the landmass of the United Kingdom, just slightly greater. In the UK, we've got 68 million people, and in New Zealand, they've got 5 million people. And a quarter of that, so only about 1.5 million, live on the South Island, which is the same population as Birmingham and Leicester linked together. So that whole space there is the same space as England and Wales, and you've got the population of Birmingham and Leicester living in it. So there's an awful lot of space in New Zealand, particularly on the South Island where you've got so few people. So you have great big long distances with nothing. And the further south you go, the more and more remote places get, and the less and less traffic there is.
We sort of joked between ourselves when we got to the bottom of the South Island, we could walk across State Highway number 1, the equivalent of the M1 or the A1,
Just wander
without
around.
having to look really to see if there's traffic.
What are you doing in the corner there?
Eating fish and chips. ate an awful lot of fish. I mean, New Zealand has a massive amount of fish, and lots of fish that we don't know in this country. So things like orange ruffy and blue cod and lots of other fish. But we ate a lot of fish. And, you know, to go with your fish, you, of course, have some nice chips, don't you? And we're cycling, so we can eat it. Then this is still on our journey through to Tekapo. You go through the Mackenzie country, which is a bit Wild Westish sort of feeling. This those two pictures are of the Fairley Museum. So museums in New Zealand either tend to be about early settlers or they're about the Maori. And this was an early settlers. So you got the wagons and the little houses with the Victorian ladies, and they brought their harmoniums and their heavy Victorian furniture on the ships over from the UK and set up home on this island. And then we get to Lake Tekapo, Church of the Good Shepherd.
So this is a classic view. If you see photos of tours of New Zealand and so on, you'll eventually see this church, which overlooks the lake and mountains in the background, and the lake's all pure azure blue.
Yeah.
So it's a stunning place.
Yeah. And we camped. This was our campsite, and when we arrived in the afternoon, this campsite, we were the only people there on this stretch. We went off to the hot pools, which are up there, where each pool is a different temperature and they're nice and warm, and you sit there and then looking at the view of the mountains and stuff. When we came back, that whole stretch of grass on either side of us was full up with other people. But again, another really nice campsite kitchen. Beautiful, all the equipment you need. And we sat there and ate our dinner looking out over at the view. I mean, it's just amazing. The air is so clear. It's just, beautiful. Now, I have to tell you about the custard square. So I know we have a custard slice in the UK, but the custard square is a particular New Zealand thing. I mean, I think it's pretty much like our custard slice, to be honest. But they put desiccated coconut on the top, on the icing. But I did eat quite a few custard squares because I was cycling. No, because I wanted to become a connoisseur at the custard square. I like a custard slice. There you go. So that one was a particularly good quality custard square, I have to say. So we're on our way to Oamaru now, and this one was going to take us 3 days, 140 miles, and we are going from inland in here, and we're going down a bit, aren't we, and then out to the coast. So heading back towards the sea.
So there's a official mountain biking, I suppose, trail called the Alps to Ocean that goes from Tekapo area down to Oamaru. So we thought we'd follow that. The first bit of it goes alongside this canal here, which is part of the hydroelectric schemes in the middle of the South Island. So most of New Zealand's electricity, 80%, 90% comes from hydroelectric power. So from their big lakes in the South Island, they take water from one lake to another lake, and as it falls to the other lake, they've got a hydro station, and then they take it from that lake to the next lake, another hydro station, and so on. So we cycled along the access road beside it, because it was part of the Alps to Ocean
No traffic.
trail.
Beautifully
traffic.
Peaceful.
And
gorgeous
to start
sunshine.
with, it was all nice, flat, sealed road, which is beautiful. But as we got to the end of it, they gave up on sealing it, and it became gravel, which is more challenging on our bikes.
And then part of the route that we did took us alongside Lake Benmore. Now, we were really trying to avoid mountain bike tracks because our bikes, the tyres weren't really good enough, and we had so much weight. But Dave said, this bit alongside the lake is not very far. 13 miles. 13 miles on this little track. We'd come all the way up here. Windy, it'd gone all the way around there, all the way around there. It went on and on and on and on. And sometimes it was really, really narrow. Sometimes there was quite a steep drop. Then there was sharp corners and steep bits to go up that I had to get off and slog up with my bike, which is really heavy when you're trying to push it. And it was really hot. I was really getting a bit not impressed.
And some of these bits, it had quite a drop down to the lake from the edge of the
I mean,
cycle
it was
trail.
beautiful, but it was incredibly barren.
Yeah.
But oh my goodness, I just didn't know when we were ever going to get off it. And then we met this chap.
He stopped by the side, and he'd got a puncture, his second or third for the day. And since we were so far in and so far from the end, we stopped and helped him. I had a much better pump and some spare patches. I'm not quite sure what he'd probably used all his.
He'd used all his patches. So I mean, we needed to help him.
Rescued him.
Yeah, And then when we came off the end of this path, 13 miles of trailing along it, we were sitting down in the shade under a tree, and suddenly this guy on a mountain bike scoots through the gate and pulls up and says, "Oh, can I sit down in the shade with you for a minute?" So he sits down. He's cycling the whole length of the Alps to Ocean in one day. He's done 300 and something kilometres already and has got 100 and something to go. So he's literally chat with us for a few minutes, jumped back on his bike, and off he went. It's like, oh my goodness, I couldn't believe he had so much energy.
Yes, we were taking 3 days to do it, and we weren't doing the full trail.
Yeah.
He was doing the full trail and a little bit more, because normally you had to fly to the very start of it, or get a helicopter ride to the start of it, but he cycled up from the main road up to the start and then back down.
So that just to make sure he did the whole thing.
So,
But incredibly fit,
yeah.
obviously, but obviously completely balmy. And this bit here, this is one of the hydroelectric, there you go, hydroelectric turbine, just showing you how big it is. So, yeah, this is a little bit more of the Alps to Ocean Trail. Now, we had the delight, on the Alps to Ocean Trail, actually, this was the only place we came across them, but we came across many of them, of these ways of controlling the traffic. Does my bum look big in that?
It's designed to stop motorcyclists getting onto the trails.
So you had a loop that you were supposed to be able to push your bike underneath, but our bikes were too high to go underneath. And then you had a narrow thing that you could push, or you could push your bike through that, but our bikes were too wide. Every time we came to one, we had to unload.
Oh, no.
And sort of lift the bikes a bit to be able to...
Yeah.
And particularly when they were only like maybe sometimes a couple of 100 feet apart, it was like, oh my goodness, not again. So on and off, on and off, on and off. And then, of course, because we'd survived that, we deserved an ice cream. And then we stayed in an Airbnb for a night's treat, somewhere up here, I think, in a place, it was near Twizel, which I think is a marvellous name. It's this little airfield with just a couple of hangars and some small light aircraft. And I'd come across it when I was just browsing on Airbnb and said to Dave, shall we stay here? It's like, well, yes, that'd be fun.
So it's the Apollo 14...
The 11.
11 command module, or a copy of it, really.
Made out of a grain silo, tipped on its side.
But it does contain a piece of the real original Apollo 11, which
A
is
minute speck.
in the middle of that circle is a little bit of gold foil that they used to sort of wrap the whole thing into.
It was a minute speck. But inside the module, there was a window in the roof that you could pull the curtain across or open, because this was a particular dark skies area of New Zealand where the stars are just fantastic, and so you could lie there and look at the stars. When we arrived on quite a hot afternoon, we realised how little insulation the builder had put into the thing, and it was like about 35 degrees inside it. And then, as soon as the sun went down, the temperature dropped, and in the morning, I'm sure it must have been 0. It was flipping freezing. But it was great fun. And down the valley from our Apollo 11 was Mount Cook, which is the highest mountain in New Zealand. So really beautiful, really crazy place to stay. And then we get to Oamaru, which is on the coast, down here. So we've only come from Christchurch up there at the minute, gone in, come down. And Oamaru is the steampunk capital of New Zealand, the world, who knows? So steampunk is making things out of junk metal, seemingly, and sort of crossed between Victorian sort of fashion. And Oamaru was originally a very affluent town. It made a lot of money out of wool.
I think it was a combination of shipping wool and... Yeah, it was mainly wool.
And they built a lot of very fancy Victorian buildings. And then the industry crashed, or the town had overspent, basically, and they didn't have the money to knock the fancy buildings down, so they just left them, but they basically abandoned them. So there was a lot of buildings that were just neglected and not used for many, many years, which have now recently been sort of discovered again and opened up into fancy, shops and cafes and stuff like that. But it makes for quite a pretty place. So you've got buildings like these, which are just very, very beautiful, all the way along their main street. And then you've got a really old street like this, which is where all the warehouses were for the sheep's wool and the industry, that are now beautiful cafes and things. And there was a little moment of Dave trying to run me over with the train. And then this is the steampunk headquarters was this building where they have all these crazy, wacky things that are made out of metal, and Dave had a jolly good time. So then we travel on from Oamaru down here, and we're going to go all the way down the coast to Dunedin. Is that Dunedin there?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then we're going down to Balclutha, which is a funny place there, and then we're going round to Invercargill, which is round there, so right then down at the very bottom. And this takes us a number of days. So we're off to Dunedin, but we realise that the forecast isn't very good, so there's some heavy rain in the forecast. So I persuade Dave that we should stay in an Airbnb for a few days and avoid the heavy rain, because it's really no fun cycling. We're not there to torture ourselves, we're there to have a nice time. It's no fun cycling in pouring rain and no fun camping in pouring rain. So we book a really nice Airbnb in a place called Karitane, which is this tiny little place a few miles out of Dunedin. And we spend a few days there, and we travel in and out of Dunedin on the bus and explore Dunedin, and it doesn't rain. And and we keep thinking, there is rain in the forecast. We shouldn't leave yet. We've booked this, for 3 nights. Let's just, it's going to be fine. So on the day that we do move to Dunedin, one day, 26 miles, one mountain, it pours with rain. And we're going into Dunedin, and we're going to stay with the parents of the lady called Fiona, who we're staying with in Christchurch, who we hadn't met her before we turned up at her house in Christchurch, and we've never met her parents before, and we turn up looking like drowned rats.
So Fiona from Christchurch is a friend of my sister-in-law, who's also called Fiona in Christchurch. So we're staying with the parents of a friend of my sister-in-law.
So all these tenuous relationships that we were building up with people as we moved around the country. So she welcomed us into her home with our soaking wet stuff. She had a heated floor in the bathroom, which we put all our stuff all over to dry out. And then off we go to, we're on our way down south, basically. So you go, as you're on your way down south, you come to the Maoraki boulders. How were they formed?
Nobody knows.
Nobody knows. Nobody knows. Literally, nobody knows how they form.
Yeah, we found one being birthed with Janet standing next to it there.
Sorry. Gone the wrong way. Yes, it's being carved. Is that what they call it?
Yeah. Okay.
Being carved from the cliff, this great big boulder. And then they sort of sink into the sand, and they do then start to break up and decay, and they have these strange crystal sort of formations in this sort of grid pattern, and then eventually they crack open and fall apart. But nobody knows how they're formed. Yeah. These are our views from the house that we were staying in Karitane, which was looking out towards the sea. But first of all, there was a river, and then a sand spit, and then the sea beyond. And it was really very beautiful. And there was a rainbow, so somewhere while we were there was rain. So when we were staying in Karitane, we hired a car for a day and drove out to the albatross colony. So just round on the peninsula, there's an albatross colony. Now, the albatross is an amazing bird, and this is the Northern Royal? Southern Royal? Southern Royal. The Southern Royal albatross. And it's a massive bird. Its wingspan is about 3 metres. And it spends 85% of its life at sea, only returning to land to nest and to mate. So it spends all of its life out there on the South Pacific and the oceans of the southern bit of the world. It's just incredible. They can live to their 60, keep on having babies. It's just amazing. And then they can fly 10,000 miles in one journey.
So they've put GPS trackers on some of these. So some of the ones that are nesting, they take turns and fly off for several days to go and get food, and then they bring food back for the babies. But some of them fly from the Dunedin side of the South Island all the way round via the sea to the other side of the South Island, where there's lots of fish, do fishing, then all the way back again, feed the bird, the babies. And then when they fledge
Yeah.
and fly off, the first journey that the young ones do is several years long, and they fly all the way around the world in the southern hemisphere.
It's really amazing. They're really incredible birds.
Yeah.
They're absolutely massive. But their wings are actually, you know, when you see a glider, they have very, very long but very narrow wings, don't they? And albatrosses are like that. Their wings are very narrow but extremely long. And when you see them soaring and zooming across the surface, apparently they can smell food on the water 12 miles away. Just incredible. So they eat stuff that's floating on the surface. But so they sweep down and they come across the surface. Just incredible to see, isn't it? Really enormous birds. So then we're now down here. We've got down to Balclutha, which is, I think, is that about Balclutha? Yeah. Very depressing place, I have to say, Balclutha, and I have nothing else to say about it. So we're moving on to, other than the name was slightly interesting, but it was really depressing. So then we move on to Papatoai. Now, on our journey to Papatoai, we've arranged to meet up with Dave's cousin Jeff and his wife Sarah, who are travelling in the South Island in their camper van. So we'd already arranged to meet up at Papatoai and stay overnight with them in the camper van. Now, this is a pretty hilly day. The night before, I didn't get much sleep. I am very tired. I am slightly grumpy. It's quite hot. And we've got about another 10 miles or so to go to get to our campsite, and we come to the bottom of yet another enormous hill, and I was really struggling. And then, toot, toot! Who comes by but Jeff and Sarah in the camper van? Do you want a lift? I flung my bike and all my luggage into the van and jumped in. There was no way I was not accepting that lift. But Dave, the purist, of course.
Well, semi-pure.
Semi-pure.
I put my luggage in the van.
And then cycled up the hill. But it was pretty hilly, that last bit, wasn't it?
Yes.
But we stayed at a beautiful campsite with them. And in the evening, we walked along this really beautiful beach with them. So we had a great time. And Sarah cooked the dinner. It was all lovely. That was nice. And then from Papatoai, down here somewhere, we went round this bit of it's called the Catlins, and it's sort of like, I don't know, a bit of a Cornish sort of bit of the south, you know, popular with holiday makers, very, very beautiful beaches, very beautiful coastline, rugged and interesting. And so we cycled from, it was only a short day, to Curio Bay, which was my favourite campsite of the whole trip, I think. It was just beautiful. Now, these plants are called New Zealand flax. So flax that we call flax, my mum says, that's not flax, but that's New Zealand flax, and they are enormous. And they're very thick and tough leaves, but they grow, well, like that. They grow everywhere in New Zealand. And so this campsite had little nooks that were in amongst the flax. So you were really sheltered in your little nook from any wind. And it was just lovely. So we set up home. And then we walked around down to the sort of the coast and where the waves were and everything. There was this incredible kelp.
Yep.
Kelp. There's Dave enjoying the waves, and us cooking our standard meal. So when we were camping, we were rather adventurous because we ate in lots of cafes and we bought ice cream and stuff. When we cooked for ourselves, it was generally a tin of tin tomatoes, Mexican flavour, a tin of mixed beans, a courgette and an onion. I think on this day we might have added some noodles, just for a bit of exoticness. And there might have been a bit of chili powder we added as well. But it was a healthy, very quick to prepare and cook meal that we absolutely loved. More of Curio Bay. Now, when I unpack my side of the tent and do my luggage, you know, my panniers are neat in a row. My bed, everything's neat. Outside is all very tidy. You look at Dave's side of the tent, and it's like there's been some sort of explosion all over the grass. So Dave's got his stuff everywhere, and you know, over my side there'll be that's my little thing. My water bottle is ready. My shoes are by the side. My bags are all tucked under there. I thought Dave was a tidy guy before this trip. So, leaving Curio Bay, the beauty of Curio Bay, we go round the coast to Invercargill, which is right at the very, very bottom, and which is where Dave's sister-in-law's brother, Eric, lives. And again, we'd never met the bloke, and we went to stay with them. That's Eric and his wife, Donna. They were lovely. Want to tell about Bluff?
Yep. So from Invercargill, we were going to go down to Stewart Island,
Doing it.
and the sort of catch a ferry from a place called Bluff, and that's where the place with all the signs to different parts of the world. It's the southernmost end of State Highway number 1. So
It's like with bits in this country where you say actually it's the furthest part south,
Yeah.
but then it's not actually the somewhere that's slightly further part.
So
Bluff
it's
is known
the
as the
Land's
first.
End of
Yeah,
New
yeah.
Zealand.
There's another tiny little
Yeah.
bit that's actually further south than Bluff, but you know.
So Eric very kindly drove us down to Bluff so we could catch the ferry, and drove us to the signpost so we could get our photo taken. So that was very
And
nice.
off we go to Stewart Island. So on Stewart Island there is one town and it's called Oban.
Do you want to put Stewart
And
Island
it is just about
That's
there.
the island.
So most of the island is inaccessible. It's all covered with trees, bush, as the New Zealanders call it, or forest, but very, very dense forest. So New Zealand bush has tall trees, it has medium trees, and it has low-level bushes and stuff. So it's very difficult to get through. So from Oban, there are a few walking trails that you can. There's one 3-day walking track that goes around the top part of the island. That lots of people come to do, but you'd sleep overnight in huts on that. But we didn't do that. We just did some day walks out from Oban. The weather wasn't particularly. It was a bit grey, wasn't it?
It was grey the first day there.
Yeah.
There in a couple of showers. Not many people in New Zealand have been to Stewart Island.
Yeah.
Now, this is the first time I'd ever been there, and I'd lived in New Zealand for a long time.
But it was significantly beautiful. Really, very, very beautiful. And I found these beautiful, beautiful shells. Look, these ones that were greeny were lovely. And the tragedy of this little clutch of shells was I lost them. I left them somewhere. Oh, I don't know where. But anyway, I got others to replace it, but those little green ones would have been lovely. And then from Stewart Island, we did a day trip to Ulva Island, which is a tiny little island, somewhere right down near Stewart Island there. And it's a bird sanctuary. It's completely predator-free. So New Zealand does a lot of work to get rid of predators. So before Europeans or whoever else came to New Zealand, it would have significantly been a predator-free land. And then gradually all sorts of predators come in, you know, rats.
So rats, weasel. Well,
Yeah.
so before the Maoris arrived, there weren't any predators and lots of unique birds that had their nests on the ground. So, because they didn't have to worry about things taking their eggs. Maoris brought the rats, and then the Europeans brought weasels and stoats,
Cats, hedgehogs.
So, yeah, in New
What
Zealand...
were the other things that we kept seeing run over on the road?
Possums.
Possums, that's the one.
Possums are bad for... They eat lots of tree leaves. They don't eat eggs of birds, though. Deer. All sorts of European animals, but New Zealand wasn't.
So there are widespread trapping programs everywhere, not just on Stewart Island and Oban, but in just general areas as well of the countryside. You see traps everywhere. They're trying to capture, and there's big programs to try and reduce the number of predators. And what really surprised me was the hatred for hedgehogs and cats. Because in this country, we love having a hedgehog, don't we? We think having a hedgehog in our garden is a privilege. But they hate hedgehogs there. They're splattered all over the roads and they don't care. And cats, there are lots and lots and lots of feral cats. And they would happily shoot them all. Whereas we're just not used to, thinking of cats like that. Cats are our pets, aren't they? But it's because they're predators. Sorry?
How come you see hedgehogs splattered on the ground when there's not many cars?
Well, that's quite amazing. I'm sure that they must see them and aim at them purposefully. But Ulva Island was beautiful. And we saw and were able to tick off a lot of birds that we were really wanting to see. So this one here is the New Zealand robin. So they're slightly bigger than our robins, and they're sort of more round, and they're grey with a white breast instead of red like ours. And then these, which you can sort of see, is a weka?
Weka.
It's a weka. And wekas are very, very cheeky birds. We sat down for our lunch, and within minutes we had 3 wekas. It's like they appeared out of out of nowhere. It's like, oh my goodness. And they look a bit like Jurassic Park, sort of miniature, very dangerous dinosaur things.
Jurassic Park, and there are these cute little dinosaurs, but then when there were lots of them, they were a problem.
Or you had Mummy somewhere that was coming to get you. But yeah, they are quite, because they're flightless birds, but they got quite mean-looking beaks and eyes, and they're very inquisitive. So then we go, after 4 days on Stewart Island, we go back. Eric picks us up from Bluff. We stay with them overnight again in Invercargill, and we set off, this time to travel along the coast a little bit and then up. So this whole area here is Fjordland, which is full of fjords, full of the earth, and is extremely, extremely inaccessible. There are no roads. So you can generally only get into any of this area if you fly in on a helicopter or a plane, or if you go by a boat and you go into one of the fjords further around. So it's a massively enormous but inaccessible bit of the South Island. But one place that you can get to is Milford Sound by getting to Tiarnau.
Yeah.
So we come across from Invercargill, we go up there, and then we come up, and Tiarnau is up here, and then Milford Sound is all the way up here. So again, straight roads. Oh, and this is a really helpful sign that you see when you're cycling along. Now, I would much rather, you can't really see it too well, but they've got little notches there, and what they're basically saying is if your bike goes into one of the notches, you'll fall off. Well, I would rather they didn't spend money on the signs, but they made sure there weren't ridges in the road that were going to tip me off. We'd see them and we'd go, what a ridiculous sign. But, beautiful straight roads again, beautiful scenery, no traffic, off we go. 114 miles in 3 days. Valentine's Day, which suddenly came upon us, and I didn't really realise.
It was Valentine's Day until halfway through the day.
Yeah. We were staying at a place called Lake Manapuri, a beautiful lake, and we had fish and chips in a restaurant. In fact, we had fish and chips in a little church restaurant called, was it called the chapel or called the church?
Chapel, probably.
It was a little wooden church, and right next to it was another little wooden church. And I said to the guy at the bar, was this originally a church? And he said, yes. And then he said, but it was brought here from somewhere else. And I said, oh, what about the one next door? Oh, they brought that one in as well. Because I thought, how crazy to have two little tiny churches next door to each other. And then we went on a we went on a trip for the day on a coach to Milford Sound and back. So if you're thinking we're in Tiarnau here and up to Milford is all the way up there. So to get there and back in a day is quite a long way. And so we did a coach, which took us all there, and then we did a boat trip actually on Milford Sound. And the coach was really good because they stop and let you get off and take photos and tells you bits of story and history and stuff about the area. But it is an incredible area. The steepness of the mountains coming out of the water and just going straight up was just amazing.
Yeah, so the mountain's made out of granite. So when the glaciers many eons ago carved them out, they haven't eroded since then because they're made out of granite. So the walls are just
very, very steep,
very tall and very steep.
And give you a little bit of perspective, that's the little boat there and how steep enormous the sides are. But so again, because of COVID, there's no tourists. So normally places like Milford Sound would be extremely busy places, packed with coaches and people. The coach that took us there were 17 of us on the coach. And then you get onto a boat, and I think there was probably about 25 people on the boat, so we were all sort of knocking around. And normally these things would be packed. It was all dead quiet. Then from Tiarnau, we're on our way into Queenstown. So Tiarnau's here, and Queenstown is up here. But you can't go straight across. You have to come down and round because there's mountain things in the way. More straight roads, more pedalling.
So that was going to take us 3 days.
Oh yes, we did the double, didn't we?
But the first day, we got to our end point at 12:30, and it had been downhill and tailwind. So we thought, it's a bit early to stop today.
It's a beautiful day.
Why don't we keep going?
Let's crack on.
Find a campsite a bit later. So-
20 miles more down the road, starting to feel a bit tired. Couldn't find anywhere at all to camp. We stopped and asked somebody, but they said, no, you can't camp here. Oh, my goodness. So the only option we had was but to carry on.
So by the end of that day, we'd done 80 miles of cycling, which I think was our longest.
It was our longest day,
single
yeah.
day of cycling.
And we were pretty tired then.
And because we'd gone down and then up, the wind direction that was pushing us here was starting to come against us at the end.
So it was pretty hard.
So it was a tough day.
So then we're in Queenstown, and we stay in Queenstown for a few days, and we stay in a backpackers. So we're not camping. And again, the backpackers was pretty empty, whereas normally they'd be packed. Queenstown is like the big outdoor sports city in New Zealand, really. The one that's really exciting, where they do bungee jumping and mountain biking and whatever you do on the water and all this sort of stuff. So normally it would be packed with people, very, very outdoorsy, but again, very, very quiet. Excellent ice cream. Now, I have to say, this ice cream was the most amazing ice cream place. You chose your cone. Well, you had your cone, and then you chose what chocolate you wanted to dip it in. So you had your chocolate dipped in your white milk or whatever, and then you could have sprinkles on that chocolate, even before you've started on what flavour ice cream you want. It was marvellous. And then we walked up. There's like a cable car thing, so you can go up on the mountains and look down at the views, but we walked up instead of taking the cable car, as we do. Amazing views. This was inside the cafe where we got our ice creams from, and you just sit there looking out at that amazing view. And the mountain range, does anybody know the name of the mountain range along by Queenstown? It's called the Remarkables, which I think is remarkable. Pretty fantastic name, isn't it? The Remarkable. Then we're off to Wanaka, which is that Queenstown, and that's Wanaka. It's doesn't look very far. But on the day we left Queenstown, I wasn't feeling very well. I don't know what. I took a lateral flow. It wasn't COVID, but I just felt a bit rough. Too much. Well, maybe. I was tired. I don't know. I just wasn't feeling great. So, but we had 40 miles to do, and we just had to get on with it. But it was a bit of a tough day cycling, but there was some beautiful scenery. And we stopped at the most famous bungee place.
So this is where commercial bungee jumping started in the world. So Kawerau Bridge, A.J. Hackett's bungee jumping.
With the best toilet sign in the world.
Yeah. Yes. Again, because of COVID, normally it would be packed. We went into their centre, and it was a huge circular building with a spiral staircase coming down the outside to the
Cafes
middle,
and shops.
where they had cafes and merchandise, and then you went out onto a balcony and you could see the bridge and people jumping off. 6 people maybe there.
But we actually did see two people jump.
Yeah, there were
So
some
amazingly.
people jumping. We're lucky to see that. But it
No. That's one thing I will never do, but I have no desire at all to leap off and dangle
So
by your
after
feet.
watching them jump, you had a little lie down in the bus shelter.
I really wasn't feeling great, so I had a little snooze, and then we set off again. And we were staying at a place near. What was it called? Scottish name. Bannockburn.
Bannockburn.
We stayed at a place called Bannockburn near Cromwell, which is the stone fruit capital of New Zealand. So they're big into peaches. Oh my! Wouldn't it be amazing to grow peaches in our gardens? Oh, lovely. There's Dave having a peach feast.
And that it was a giant peach.
Really big peach. The other thing big in this
so
area
juicy.
is wine. So there were lots and lots of vineyards. So very different countryside to what we've seen before. You've got rolling slopes and beautiful, rows and rows and rows of vineyards. And we stayed in a little cabin that night because I wasn't feeling great and had a better night's sleep. The next day I was feeling fine. And we headed on to Wanaka, which again is it's like a slightly more sedate version of Queenstown. Bit more old, as in older people.
Yeah.
Slightly less adventure sport,
So
but
Queenstown's the hard, adrenaline junkie adventure capital of New Zealand, and Wanaka is where the people who like outdoors but not quite so adrenaline based go.
yeah. So it was beautiful, and we were there for a couple of days, and Wanaka has a very famous tree,
So again, if you look at photos of New Zealand and so on, you're quite likely to come across this tree growing out of a lake. And that's where that was.
And we had a marvellous night at the cinema. So Wanaka has one of those independent cinemas where they have nice things like sofas and stuff in there. And this one was even better because they served warm cookies in the interval. Now, who has had an interval since the 1950s? And who serves warm cookies in the interval? It was amazing. And we were the only people in that screen watching the film. So when we stopped for the interval, they said, well, it's up to you how long you want the interval to be, because it's just you. So we said, well, let's crack on then.
So eating warm cookies and watching the movie.
And we had, of course, a little bit more ice cream. So then we're on our way to Haast. So Wanaka is up here, and we're going to Haast, which is on the west coast. Now, the early settlers, when they came to New Zealand, were really adventurous in the way that they named the islands. They called this one the South Island, and the other one the North Island. And down there at the bottom, they call it Southland, and up at the top of the North Island, they call it Northland. And here on the west coast, they call it the West Coast. So it's called the West Coast. And the West Coast isn't just the west coast of the whole of New Zealand. It's the West Coast is that particular bit
The South Island.
of the South Island. It's called the West Coast. And the West Coast is traditionally very, very, very wet. Both times that Dave and I have cycled on the West Coast, there's been a drought. And there was no rain. So on our way to Haast, finally, after cycling all this way from Christchurch, all the way down, all the way around, where we've seen no other cyclists at all, we start seeing other cycle tourers. And this couple here were on a tandem, and they were dressed really, really brightly, and they immediately screeched to a halt and have a chat, which was absolutely brilliant. And they told us about another young lady that they'd seen who was cycling on her own, and they said, well, if you meet her, stop and say hello. But this was a really stunningly beautiful day, really gorgeous cycling, and we get to, look at that.
Yeah.
Deer. Just lovely. And we stop at a little campsite at Cameron Flats, and over the road, a little bit of a walk down, there are the blue pools, which are drain off from the glaciers. So they were, I think it has to be the coldest water I've ever been in my life. I did actually get in, I did actually get my shoulders under. And then the second time you got in, because you were completely numb from the first time, it was absolutely fine. But, oh my goodness, but it was beautiful. The colour is just so blue and crystal clear, and I went in my cycling kit because the campsite we were staying at was very basic. There was no showers or anything, so I thought, I need a wash, get in the water. So here we are, we've set up camp for tonight, and today we are in a truly amazing surroundings. Look, all around us. That's a little toilet block over there. Just a little car park. Mountains all around us, mountains up there, and over there you can even see some snowy ones.
And more flax bushes.
Yeah, a little tent surrounded by all that. Beautiful. And it was just fantastic. Just camping in places like that, surrounded by just nature, I suppose, and the birds that you can hear, and just really lovely. So then this is on our journey to Haast. We stop at this place called Lake Paringa. Now, Dave's grandfather.
So when we stopped there, as dusk settled, sandflies appeared. Now, sandflies are like midges, slightly larger, everywhere, and they bite.
It's like a sting. It's like a little...
You can feel it. It's not like a mosquito that you don't feel. And, so at Lake Paringa, we sheltered inside our tent and sort of zipped it closed and stayed inside after dusk and so on. When I mentioned this on our Instagram account or Facebook to my parents, they said, your grandfather stayed at Lake Paringa. He was a geologist, a miner, so he was going surveying some areas looking to see if there was minerals to be mined. and they had their base camp there, and he wrote about how bad the sandflies were there as well. So
Generations later,
Go
they're
down-
still the same.
yeah.
And again, because of the lack of showers, we swam in the lake. But then your clothes do start getting a little bit stinky. Anyway, so Harst is right on the coast, and we're now making our way up the coast, just straight up the west coast to Fox Glacier. So there's Fox Glacier, and there is Franz Josef Glacier, and these are glaciers that are relatively near the coast and that you can see. And there, this young lady there is the young lady that couple on the tandem told us about. We did see her, and she was cycling all on her own. She was relatively young, probably late 20s or 30s, and she was cycling all by herself. Very brave out there in the middle of nowhere. When we get into Fox, we camp just down the road, and this whole road would normally be parked up with cars. All the holiday campsites would be full of tourists, but there's nothing. There's nobody. And the cloud was very low on the mountains. And we needed to get somewhere for dinner that night because we didn't have any food. And we looked, because I thought that Fox was going to be like this buzzing little, mountain cool place, but it was dead. Anyway, we went to one restaurant, and this evening, it was only just down the road. The one time we had really heavy rain was when we walked to the restaurant. And we both got there, and I was wearing shorts. And of course, when you're wearing a waterproof jacket, all the water falls off the bottom of your jacket onto your trousers, doesn't it? So my shorts were just...
yeah, we were both soaked from the jacket down.
Anyway, it was a nice meal. And then just along from Fox Glacier is Lake Matheson, which just has beautiful mirror lake views where the mountains reflect in the water. And we got up early in the morning to go off to Lake Matheson, and I had a rather joyful walk down the road. You can't see it too well, but I'm having a bit of a dance. And then there was this beautiful cafe at the visitor centre where you could sit there and just look at the amazing view of the mountains, and it was just incredible. And that's the mirror.
And that mountain there, whoops, press the wrong button. That mountain there's either Mount Tasman or Mount Cook, and just behind the clouds is the other one. So it's a classic view again of...
Yeah, you would have been able to see both mountains reflected in the lake if the clouds had been a bit higher.
We saw them both earlier as we were walking down, but the clouds were moving around as the
But it was
day
just
moved on.
so beautiful, just incredibly beautiful. Then we go from Fox Glacier to Franz Josef, so further up the west coast, just only a short distance, 3 mountains. Now, if you think about what I was like in Christchurch, where I was thinking, how am I ever going to be able to cycle up a mountain, up a slope of any type, actually. We went up these 3 mountains without getting off and pushing, up and down each one.
Yeah.
Getting fit. It was a marvellous, fantastic. This is the Franz Josef Glacier. It's got 2 legs that come down, but it is massively reduced from where it used to be. I mean, it's really, really reducing. And we did an amazing walk up a hill called Alex Knob, and this was us at the top. Again, you can see the glacier in the background. And now this is another chap that we stopped and had a chat with, our 3rd cycle touring guy. And this chap is Dean. Now, Dean, we first met back in Wanaka. We arrived at the campsite. Was it Wanaka?
Yep.
Yeah, we arrived at the campsite, and in the tent area where we were directed to, there was this sort of...
There was actually another tent.
There was another tent, but it wasn't a proper tent. It was 2 walking poles with a tarpaulin stretched between and pegged out, and underneath was a sleeping bag. But there was nobody there. And we set up, and we were going, cool, he's travelling light. I mean, hardly anything. Anyway, in the end, over he wanders, and we have a chat, and he's hitchhiking. He's British. He's been over in New Zealand for about 6 months, got stuck a bit because of COVID or whatever, and he's hitchhiking around, so he doesn't carry very much at all. So we got on well with Dean. Next day, off he went. We say goodbye, thinking we're never going to see him again. When we get to Harst, we get to Harst, there's Dean again. Whoa, Dean's here. Because although he's hitchhiking, at times we're sort of, if he's struggling to get a lift or if he decides to stop somewhere and look at something, we're sort of passing each other. So he was in Harst, had a nice chat. And the next day, he got a lift with a camper van. And actually, as we were cycling, he passed us and waved to us out the window. So we never thought we'd see him again. Then we get to Franz Josef, and off we go up Alex Knob and all the way to the top. Amazing views. And on our way down, who's coming up but Dean? And he's run out of water. So because we're on the way down, Dave gives him some water from his water bottle. And Carol?
Gave him some water, tipped it out of my bottle into his, put my bottle back in my rucksack, walked down, completed the walk. When we got back to our base, couldn't find my water bottle. Oh no, it must have fallen out. I mustn't have tucked it in properly. We were just wandering back into town to the corner store to get some beans and tomatoes to make our normal meal, and saying to Janet, wouldn't it be funny if Dean had found my bottle on his way down? And we came across him.
He was sitting outside the shop.
Lo and behold, outside the shop, there's Dean. And he says, oh, I found this. It's yours.
But that was the last time we saw him. He was going up to as far as Greymouth and then he was on his way back to Christchurch and he was flying back to the UK in the end of March. And never saw him again. Franz Joseph, once we've done the glacier walk and we move on from there, we're going to stop just for a day, one night, at Okarito, which is a place that Dave has really, 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 really wanted to go to because he's wanted to see the white heron sanctuary. Now, white herons are quite rare in New Zealand, and there's this one sanctuary over on the coast somewhere up here.
So it's the only place in New Zealand where they breed.
So there's a big lagoon, and Okarito is a very tiny place. It's got a little tiny campsite, has no shop or anything. It's quite a small settlement, and there's a kayak centre that you can hire kayaks and paddle out onto the lagoon. So we get there in time to go out on the lagoon for a few hours, and the kayak centre's shut. They're shut for a day of filming or something. So just that one day, and we have no days to spare at this point because we've booked a train later on, and we've got to get there. So Dave really wants to see a white heron. So I pray, Lord, somehow let Dave see a white heron. So all day we go by. I go for a wander along the beach. Dave goes for a walk inland. The day's moving on. Time is running out. And then on the evening, we walk along the beach, and there's 4 rather drunk fishermen standing on the beach looking out to sea. And we look out and we go, what's that? And we say to them, what's that? And they say, it's a white heron. So one of them had a monocular thing, and so we were able to look through it, and it was a white heron. But we stood there. I don't know how long. Did we stand there for an hour waiting for this flipping thing to move? It was like dusk, and we were expecting it to think, I've got to go home for bed soon. I'll get up and I'll fly. And to see it fly would have been amazing. It stood there, stock still. And they said it's very patiently fishing. And it was like, oh, come on, just move.
Yeah,
Didn't.
Waiting for a fish for the tide to be right or something.
So it would have been lovely to see one like that, but that's not my picture. That's my picture. So that was it for white herons.
Yeah. An answer to prayer, but not,
not
quite what we're expecting.
I looked rather cherry-coloured there, but I'm sure I wasn't quite that red. Anyway, Okarito, more sandflies. Moving on from Okarito, we camped at a lake called Lake Ianthe, and again inundated with sandflies. Beautiful, beautiful mirror reflections. Old wood buildings, basically. Then we're coming up the coast still, up to Greymouth. Is that Greymouth about there?
Yep.
Somewhere there-ish,
Just south of Greymouth, Hokitika.
Yeah, so south of Greymouth at Hokitika, and the best thing about Hokitika was ice cream. Oh, that was amazing. Now, in New Zealand, they have real fruit ice cream, and I have no idea why we don't have this system in our country, because it's cool. You put scoops of vanilla ice cream into this thing, and some scoops of frozen fruit, and then it's got like a screw that they push down into it, and it mixes the fruit and the ice cream together and squeezes it out into the cone. And everywhere in New Zealand had these machines, yet we don't have it here at all, do we?
But Hokitika had the best ones,
Yes.
because you pay for a double scoop of it, and they put 3 or 4 scoops of ice cream in.
And yours was a spiced apple or something, wasn't it? And
you
mine
see
was
how tall that ice cream is.
And mine was a boysenberry, and I absolutely love boysenberry.
And it fills the cone as well, so it was fantastic.
So we get to Greymouth, where nudists are apparently welcome. Although we didn't
Didn't
join
see
in with
any.
that. Oh, we didn't see any. We weren't looking. But, Now, the thing that we'd been looking forward to most in Greymouth was going to Monteith's Brewery, where they have a restaurant where we had the best chips we've ever had in our lives on our last trip to New Zealand. So we wanted to go back to Monteith's to have some chips, hoping we wouldn't be disappointed, and to have a meal to celebrate, sort of almost finishing this circuit. So Dave had a big platter with ribs and chips and stuff. And then for pudding, it was like
It's called
nachos. It was like ice cream nachos. So it was like...
called ice cream nachos.
Yeah, it was like broken up waffle cone with lumps of different flavoured ice creams and chunks of different chocolates and sauce on the top. Oh, it's gorgeous. We had a lovely meal at Monteith. And then we caught, and this was our final campsite in Greymouth, and it was just beautiful. Behind there is the beach. So just the other side is the beach, and it was just really beautiful. And then we catch the Transalpine train back to Christchurch. Now, the reason that we're not cycling in this is because we have cycled it in the other direction. We've gone Christchurch to Greymouth, and you go over Arthur's Pass, which is quite a steep hill, but then you go down the Otira Gorge, which is this incredibly steep and long gorge where you could smell our brakes pads burning all the way down. There was no way I was ever going to cycle up there. So we decided to get the train. Now, one thing we had realised in New Zealand as we were going around is that New Zealand really doesn't do trains. In Dunedin, they had a beautiful train station, which is apparently the most photographed building in the whole of New Zealand. But there's no trains. It doesn't have one train. It's an art gallery and a museum. But they do have some tourist trains. So the Transalpine train is actually a tourist train. It's not a commuting train. And again, because of COVID, there were hardly any people, so they weren't running the train every day, which is why we'd had to make sure we got to Greymouth at the right time to catch the train that we were getting. So it was a pretty cool train ride, really. I think what we'd like to do is do it in the winter, where you've got snow on the mountains, because it was a bit of a grey day when we were doing it, so the clouds were quite low, and but it would just be so incredibly spectacular in the snow. So we're back to Christchurch. That's our whole 6 weeks done. Christchurch all the way around, all the way back up and back across. That was 2,000 miles of travelling. Well, just under 2,000 actually,
Yeah.
isn't it? So we have 10 days back in Christchurch, where we're doing sort of planning for the next section that we're going to cycle. And we have more ice cream. And this, we visit Dave's sister. We spend a day with her somewhere in there as well. Had a lovely time. And then off we go again. And this time we're going to be making our way up to the North Island. So, but because we're still only down here in Christchurch, we've actually got quite a way to go to get up to the top. So Christchurch to Kaikoura is 2 days, 115 miles. And Kaikoura is a significant whale watching place. And we hadn't done any whale watching when we'd been there before, so this time we were going to make the most of it. And we had a beautiful campsite, and we had some absolutely delicious chips. But a really lovely campsite with Kaikoura Mountains in the background. And the one whale that we did see was on a beautiful mural in the town. But when we went whale watching, and you got an 80% discount, an 80% refund if you didn't see a whale. But we did see this. And they do it just for fun. Isn't that amazing? I'd love to be a dolphin. There were so many of them just swooping along and chasing each other by the boat. It's just incredible. They're just so joyful, aren't they? The way they just, yeah. These are probably the same length as us. Yeah.
Yeah.
These are dusky dolphins, but they had a ball. And we saw some flying albatrosses, which we were able to identify because of our other visit. And so even though we got our 80% refund and we didn't see any whales, we had an amazing trip. So from Kaikoura had a really big earthquake in...
Oh, it was a year or two before we went.
last time, 2006, 2005, something like that. Had a very big earthquake where the seabed had significantly risen up. So land that was under the water is now out of the water, and the road was completely destroyed. There were a lot of landslides and things that destroyed, because the road is right on the very edge of the coast as you're going up. That bit of New Zealand, the road is right on the edge. So most of that road was destroyed. Kaikoura was completely cut off for a long time because of the road damage. And last time we were in New Zealand, they were still repairing it, and there was still the odd landslip onto the road. So we are cycling up. We've cycled up to Kaikoura, and we're going up, and we stop in a place called Seddon. So again, we've cycled along. There is a train track. Right, bye. What time is it? Oh, we better hurry up. Okay. There is a train track which... Bye, Richard. There is a train track which runs up from Christchurch to Picton up here, which again is another tourist one which isn't running at the moment. So our road was alongside it, but we never saw a train. This is like the coastline around on the coast there, and we stopped in Seddon where we camped overnight, and we were quite tired, and about 8 o'clock in the evening we're sort of dozing in the tent when suddenly and Dave says, "What was that? Was that an earthquake?" And I thought, I've got no idea what it was, but it was really quite strong. And then later on it was confirmed. It was about 4.7 on the Richter scale, apparently. So at that campsite, that was a bit of a weird campsite. Quite a lot of the campsites that we stayed at weren't holiday parks. They were motor parks or whatever, where you actually had quite a few permanent residents living in vehicles or in tents. And this campsite was a bit of a weird one. It sort of felt a little bit more rough than some of the others we'd stayed at. There was a lady that I had a conversation with when she was sitting in her bus, leaning out the window, asking questions all about me. But there was this chap, a Maori guy, camping in a tent right next to us, and his tent was full of stuff, and he had a car that was full of stuff. And he was a bit rough, but he was quite friendly. He let us use the camping picnic table, which was nice of him. And then later on in the kitchen, he was in the little kitchen, and he was cracking open sea urchins that were about this big. And they were black, very, very spiky, and he was cracking them in half with a knife, and then he was scooping the innards out and spreading it on white bread and butter and eating it. So I said, "Oh my goodness, what is that?" So we ended up having a bit of a chat, and he was showing me the inside. When you crack it open, it looks like an alien, but there's this white bright yellow roe, like caviar, but bright yellow, and that's what he was scooping out and eating. He said, "Do you want some?" And I said, "No." But I probably should have been brave and tasted it. But he was a bit of a character. So then we get up to Picton, which is right at the top.
More vineyards.
Yeah, lots of vineyards.
Marlborough wines from Marlborough.
Yeah, this whole area is Marlborough.
Supermarkets around here.
And we stayed in a little hut. That's our bikes outside. And we're glad we did, because that night there was really heavy rain.
We cut our stay in Kaikoura short by a day because we knew rain was coming. And we got up to Picton just before the rain.
Made it in time. And then the next day, we were catching the ferry from Picton, which is somewhere in here. And you get the ferry, and you go out here, and then you have to wiggle through there, and you come out here, out there, and then you go all the way over there, and you have to go all the way in, all the way in, all the way into there. To Wellington. So it's about 4 hours?
3 hours.
3 hours. The views are spectacular. Of course, you're coming out through the Marlborough Sounds, which is just beautiful. The crossing was very, very smooth. Sometimes it can be really, really rough, but it was very smooth for us. And we get over to Wellington. And when we arrived into Wellington, we dumped all our stuff in the hotel where we were staying, and we walked along the waterfront into the city. And there were people standing on the water's edge looking out, and we were going, God, what are they looking at? And the sky was going crazy, and you could see lightning flickering in the clouds in the distance. And it was, becoming, the water was looking sort of all glassy and strange, and it was clear that there was a storm coming, but it was just quite, very
So we were
menacing.
We were in sunshine, but there were these dark grey clouds.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Hovering, coming towards us.
And we went to a little ice cream shop, and we got, as you do, as you do, and we got some ice cream. We walked back to the hotel, and within about a minute of being back in our room, the storm hit, and the rain was lashing across the roads that we could see, and the lightning. It was just amazing, but we missed it.
Yeah.
So we had a good first day in Wellington. We went to the museum, where they have an amazing exhibition on Gallipoli, with these enormous. Oh, hold on. With these enormous statues. So there's a workshop in Wellington called the Weta Workshop, where they produce a lot of the scenery and special effects and stuff for movies, like Lord of the Rings and stuff.
Lord of the Rings.
And the Weta Workshops had produced these enormous statues, and they were perfect in every way. Every hair, like on their cheek, every hair on the back of the hand, or every drip of sweat. It was just incredibly lifelike and realistic, but enormous. Really, really moving exhibit. And we saw an exhibition of this lady's paintings. She's a very famous New Zealand artist called Rita, and we saw this is the Beehive, which is the government Parliament building. So we had a nice day in Wellington. Dave was telling me about this lovely bike shop that he wanted to go and visit called Bicycle Junction. And the next day, off we went to Bicycle Junction. I can say no more. No, Bicycle Junction. This happened because of Dave. Now I have to. Bicycle Junction has this amazing Trump Loyal effect painting on the outside to make it look like stone. And I was trying to. That's just a flat wall. It's not like that. It's painted like that. I was trying to get Dave to appreciate the Trump Loyal effect of the paintwork when I fell off the curb. And this is the bike shop. And, of course, Dave was excited about the bikes that were outside the bike shop, which were amazing cargo bikes. I was excited about the paintwork on the outside of the building, fell off the curb, broke my foot. Spent a lovely few hours at Wellington Hospital. And when we... after a few minutes of Dave holding me up, he did actually help me get across the road into the cafe, and we sat down. I put my foot up, had some hot sweet tea to get over the shock, and then we had been on our way next to go to a sort of cool indoor food market, a bit like Borough Market in London, where you get all these cool foods. And I was so desperate to go there that despite the absolute agony in foot, we still went there. And I can't believe now that I actually managed to hop round that place for a bit.
At that point, we were hoping it was just a sprained ankle and it would come right or something.
Yeah, but I just couldn't. And so we left there, and I said, I think we need to go to the hospital. We tried to hail a taxi, but apparently you're not allowed to hail a taxi in the street. You have to phone them up. So Dave tried to phone them up, but they wouldn't answer. And then we said, well, we're going to have to go on the bus. So then I had to hop all the way along the road to the bus stop. And then the bus came, and we couldn't work out how to pay.
The guy said, have you got a gold card? What? I don't know what you mean.
So we didn't have the appropriate method of payment.
Yeah.
So he said, where are you going? And we said, the hospital. And he took one look at me and said, you can get on for free. So we got to the hospital, and they put me in a boot and on crutches, which unfortunately then, that was just in that one instant, in that moment, all the plans for the rest of our New Zealand trip gone. I couldn't take it in. I couldn't grasp that something so silly, such a stupid accident had happened. I just went over on my foot, and now I wasn't going to be able to ride my bike, and everything we'd planned wasn't going to happen. And what on earth were we going to do? So we went back to the next place where we were going to go after we'd been in Wellington for a few days, which is right down here. We were going to go up the coast a little bit to a place called Paraparaumu, which is where Jeff and Sarah lived. Jeff and Sarah were the couple in the camper van who rescued us back in Papatoai. They're back at home in Paraparaumu, and we were going to cycle up to them next and then spend a couple of days with them seeing a bit more family. So we phoned Jeff, or Dave phoned Jeff, told him what happened, and Jeff to the rescue yet again. So they took us back to their lovely house, and I spent the weekend with my foot in the boot, lying on the sofa, feeling really sorry for myself. Dave went out for bike rides with Jeff. And then we were sitting there thinking, what on earth are we going to do? You know, we had another 2.5 weeks planned of cycling in the North Island, and before we were going to go back to Christchurch for our final 10 days in Christchurch before we came home, and it was like, oh no, what are we going to do? And then they said, well, look out there on the drive. Why don't you just use that? Nobody's using it. What they got some friends who were going to borrow it over the Easter weekend, so we just needed to be back for Easter. So we just couldn't believe it, could we?
Yeah.
It was just an amazing, amazing blessing.
So throughout our journey, God has been keeping a lookout for us, and
Not just a lookout, but
actively getting involved. Very quickly, Christmas Eve, got an email from Cathay Pacific saying your flight has been cancelled.
This was when we were still at home in the
This
UK.
is back at home in the UK, and COVID was raging, and flights were being cancelled left, right, and centre. Oh no! So praying, and then jumping on the computer.
Dave had rather a serious face on at that moment.
Trying to find an alternative flight, and we did find alternative flights that got us to Auckland on the right day to get our MIQ slot, and yeah.
But that was
worked
amazing,
out,
wasn't it?
And
Yeah.
God was there on that day when Janet was at her really lowest, at the bottom of a hill as well.
Jeff and
So
Sarah.
physically and mentally at her very lowest. And Jeff and Sarah turned up with the van. God was there in the very minor matter of my drink bottle. And Dean having found it on the way back down, and us meeting up with him.
Yeah.
So we, all through the whole trip, we felt that,
We didn't
he
get one
was,
puncture, not one puncture in 2,000 miles of cycling with either of us.
Yeah.
And your bike chain you managed to fix that, and it
The
was,
same tyres.
yeah.
Yeah, tyres are still
Yeah.
good now.
So Jeff and Sarah,
Yeah.
their van is lovely, really, really nice, really comfortable, and so we were able to borrow it. And so the next bit, North Island trip, we'll do at a later date, and you can get to see what we got up to in the North Island.
And there's a quote that
Yes.
we found.
By H.G. Wells. Every time I see an adult on a bicycle, I no longer despair for the future of the human race. Yes. Anybody got anything they want to ask? I know we've told you a lot of stuff. I think countless would be the answer.
Had a really good time.
Really, really good, yeah. Anybody else? Yes, Wolfgang.
Sorry, you didn't about Brighton. I remember you went to Brighton.
Oh, we did. Yes,
What
but
was Brighton?
so when you're in Christchurch, just here,
No, not New Brighton. This is south
oh,
of
Brighton.
Dunedin.
Oh, there's a new Brighton and there's a Brighton,
Yeah.
Wolfgang.
No, I'm not talking about New Brighton.
Okay,
but
not interested about New
Sorry,
Brighton.
So it was yet again more lovely, straight, sandy beaches, sea waves rolling in, hardly anybody on the beach. There are a couple of towns, one called Brighton, which had a lot of holiday houses. So people in Dunedin would have a holiday house down there, possibly.
Yeah.
So it was a beautiful area. So,
And there is a
yeah.
new Brighton just on the coast north of Christchurch, which has a pier, but it's literally like a concrete.
And it just goes
Motor-
out and out and out.
Yeah,
and
it's
out
like
and
a
out
it's like a
and out.
motorway flyover thing, but in pier form. But it's
Yeah.
just like a concrete stick out
They
into
fish off the end of it. And that's about it.
I didn't see any pictures of the famous fence.
the famous fence.
When we were there, we went to a lot of places you mentioned 20 years ago, or it was 18 years ago. There's a famous fence that we took pictures of.
Oh golly! Do you know where it was exactly?
Somewhere between Queenstown, somewhere outside of Queenstown. I'm not sure what I should mention it because it's in a church here.
Oh.
It's called the Bra Fence.
Ah,
Yes, I've
fence where
Yeah, people have
inside
hung
there is a
bras.
Yeah.
and it's huge. I know.
I think
Later on up near
Russell.
It's weird.
yeah,
It's weird.
near Picton, when we were coming back at the very end, we drove alongside a fence where they'd hung trainers on it. And that
Millions
went on for
There's
a
some
mile or
people
two.
doing that, don't
Yeah.
they?
So they've changed to trade.
well, we never heard about it, so
Yeah.
so maybe it doesn't exist anymore
Yeah, this is-
because nobody mentioned it.
When were we there?
And there were several routes out of
97,
Queenstown, so
But you'd
It
think
might
if it
be
was
on
that
one of the
significant a thing now, you'd hear about it.
yeah.
It'd be in the Lost Planet guide and all
This
that.
is in the guide, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, wasn't in the guide. Yeah.
It's just different, but beautiful.
we didn't come across that.
No. So the whole way round, we really didn't have that much rain. There was these couple of instances when we cycled into Dunedin there was a wet day, and then we had the wet evening when we walked into the restaurant in Fox Glacier. But the weather was really incredible, and I mean, really, particularly Fiordland is a very, very wet area of the country, and yet
yeah.
we didn't have any rain. And 'cause when you're on a bike, lots and lots of heavy rain is the last thing you want, really. And so we had an absolutely amazing trip. And lots of time with family. So we had that second 10 days, and then right at the end, after we've done our North Island bit, we come back to Christchurch and have another 10 days at the end as well. So we had lots of time with visiting
Yeah.
Dave's parents, brothers and sisters, seeing the gang. I really get on with with Dave's cousin Janice, so we spent a lot of time together,
No, I went out for bike rides with my brother.
which was nice, wasn't it? Yeah, that was really nice. Brother time, nothing competitive at all about them and their relationship.
The first time we went out for a ride, we went up onto the hills next to Christchurch, and I was on my touring bike, and a friend of my brother's had a proper road bike, and my brother had his commuting bike, because there's other bikes and mountain bikes, so it wasn't so good for going faster on the roads. And going up the hills, the friend on the road bike, and I stayed back with Alan, but it was obvious that he was struggling the most on his commuting bike. So while we were away, he bought himself a road bike. So we're not competitive. And we went for another ride, and yes, he was a bit faster than me.
How many gears have you got on your bike? Out of interest, with the travelling that you've done?
24?
Janet's got 27, and I've got 30.
So quite a lot. But when you're in the lowest gear, you're literally, to go up very, very steep hills, you could just sit there and grind away.
Yeah.
30 speed,
Yeah.
I had one of those three gears once
Oh.
with a St Patrick's bell.
Yeah.
I still got it.
Yeah.
A 3-gear bike, I can't even imagine.
Rang to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My bike has a name. My bike is called Della Ginetta Peacock, and that she is named after a gravestone that Lucy and I saw in, I think it was Chichester Cathedral, and this grave was for Della Ginetta Peacock and her brother, who was called Marmaduke. So Lucy is determined to call her children these names, when she has any. Anyway, Della Ginetta Peacock did me well.
Another question.
Yep.
Sorry, it's a bit, question. I understand you've been in a lot of places because of the lack of tourists to quite remote places where you were sort of on camping goes maybe the only or one of the very few people, or sometimes completely on your own, having your tent somewhere in the middle of nowhere. Isn't that a little bit of an eerie feeling or spooky? You never know what's happening. You're completely on your own.
It is a bit strange, and I think it does lack a bit of atmosphere sometimes. I mean, Queenstown, it was nice, and there was more people than we'd seen anywhere else. So for us, Queenstown felt a bit busy. But when we heard about what it would normally be like, it was, when really for us it was pretty dead. And it did sort of lack a bit of atmosphere because you don't have that busyness. But I don't think we felt,
It didn't feel spooky. It was.
It felt
Yeah.
peaceful.
When you are sort of,
It felt peaceful rather than eerie.
I understand you've been several times on camping, going to resorts where you were possibly the only tourists there, nobody else around.
It was quite nice.
At night, I wonder, that isn't a bit
No.
You go to
It's just
sleep.
me.
Yeah, it was nice and quiet. Yeah, because the worst thing when you're in a tent is not being able to sleep because there's noise. I mean, the biggest things that kept us awake were if you were camping near the road and there was any traffic, and then mysteriously in the night you would hear a train. Why would there be a train in the night? We never see them during the day.
Trains possibly.
Yeah.
I have done it with this railway station, with of course no passenger traffic. I understand there's still got freight lines.
Yes, there
Yeah.
are freight lines
Yeah.
and they
Yeah.
do go at night, yes.
But still not that many, not many compared to this country. Yeah.
Maybe I'm watching too many of these wrong YouTube channels.
Anyway, that gives you a bit of a flavour about what our trip was like, for that half of our trip anyway. And New Zealand is an amazing country. It takes a very long time to get there, I have to say. And jet lag takes a bit of time to get over. But of course, in MIQ, we could just sleep it through and relax. But yeah, I'd highly recommend Sam going to visit his relations again.
And Charlotte too.
And Charlotte, yeah. Yeah. Good.
Thank you for those that did the food.
Absolutely.